Hey everyone, as Community Month draws to a close, my good friend Tris gave me an interesting challenge that inspired me to make this video. Some of you might remember Tris. He was the one who also challenged me to do the sparring decks, and that was the birth of something wonderful, something awesome, and even a challenge, a new player league based around those sparring decks. Well, Tris has a new challenge. This one's a deck building and playing challenge, and this is going to be really tricky. Here's how it goes. Tris challenged me to win a game as the corporation without scoring a single agenda. So how do you possibly win? I mean, sure, you could flatline the runner, but we are not trying to win by flatline. We want to win by agenda points without scoring any agendas. That's tricky. Alright, so to do that, you need some fake agendas. Cards that are not agendas that score you points. Can you think of the cards in the current card pool that do so? These fake agendas. Pause the video if you need time to write them all down. There are a couple of them. More than a couple of them, I should say. So take your time with it. Unpause the video when you're ready to compare your answers, because here are the cards. 7. That's a lot of them. I did not count cards like Lady Liberty, which are not added to your score area directly. So yeah, there's a lot of them, sure. But all of them are only worth 1 agenda point. So building a deck that requires scoring 7 copies of these fake agendas is kind of unreasonable, bordering on impossible. That is, until the final pack of Kitara Cycle came out and gave us the blessing that was False Flag. False Flag is worth 3 agenda points. It's very unique amongst all these fake agendas for that reason. And also because of this, it means that it will be the cornerstone of any strategy, or rather any deck that attempts this challenge. You need to have False Flag there so that you can get up to 7 agenda points in an efficient manner. Right. Yeah, but even though False Flag is an important card, we still need support from some of the other 1-point fake agendas. Amongst these, there are some that are not very good candidates. Clones Are Not People is not really one that we can consider because we are not allowed to score agendas. And we need to actually score agendas in order to add Clones Are Not People into our score area. So that is pretty irrelevant for our challenge today. There are some of these cards that also are very reliant on the runner doing certain things in order for your fake agendas to be worth agenda points. An offer you can't refuse relies on the runner making the wrong choice and giving you agenda points. And Franchise City requires the runner to stumble into your agendas, which is probably not something you want to rely on too much. So we take those out and we realize that we're not left with that many cards in the card pool. So whichever card we choose will really dictate the faction we are going to play this in. It might seem obvious that since we are going to play False Flag and we are going to score multiple copies of it, that we should run 3 copies of it, but that doesn't imply that we are going to play it in Wayland. In fact, we are going to choose NBN and we are going to use Echo Chamber as our supporting fake agenda. Why NBN? Well, False Flag is only 2 influence each, so we can relatively easy splash it into other factions. We note that exchange of information can be a useful tool to get to 7 agenda points. Remember, the challenge statement dictates that you cannot score agendas. This doesn't mean that you cannot have actual agendas in your score area. And to get actual agendas into your score area without actually scoring them, one good way to do this is to use exchange. So that is something that we're going to rely on. Yeah, being able to swap an Echo Chamber for a real 3-point agenda is going to be useful and an alternate means to get up to 7 agenda points. The most important reason why we are choosing NBN over Wayland, however, is the robust agenda suite which NBN provides and Wayland lacks. Because we are not allowed to score agendas, defending our agendas becomes even more important because we cannot remove them from circulation by scoring them like most other decks normally would. They will remain in play, either in your hand, in archives or R&D throughout the entire game. So you are very, very vulnerable to losing on central accesses. It is this reason that motivates us to use a super defensive agenda suite. NBN offers Degree Mill, a nice defensive 5-3 agenda, while Wayland doesn't have any defensive agendas at all. The closest they have is CityWorks Project, which requires, for its defensive ability to work, requires you to install it, advance it, and publicize it because it's a face-up agenda. Those are all very, very bad traits for a deck that doesn't want to score said agenda, right? There's no point in us installing and advancing CityWorks when we know we're never going to score it anyways. So NBN is the natural home for such a challenge deck, and we have a very powerful identity that enables our defensive agenda suite. We can play the 6x3 agenda suite, that is to say 6 copies of 3-point agendas, 3 degree meals, and 3 SSL endorsements, because we are running a deck with a 40 minimum card deck size in Azmari at Tech. And it really helps a lot that Azmari is a strong idea in and of itself. The 40 min card is a bonus aspect that further makes it viable for this strategy, because this way we can play an 18 agenda point suite, and so we can play 6 3-point agendas. The runner has to steal 3 of our 6 agendas. That is a pretty tough ask. So that is what we're going to do. Our scoring route is pretty simple. As I mentioned, we have exchange of information available for our alternate win condition, which is if the runner goes tag me, we only need score 1 false flag, because we can score 2 echo chambers and swap one of them over for an actual 3-point agenda, making 7 agenda points. If the runner goes tag free, however, they avoid our C sources and hard hitting users and everything, we'll have to do it the hard way. Score 2 false flags and an echo chamber. You'll notice that tags synergize very well with our strategy because false flag itself dishes tags out. If our opponent attempts to contest our false flags and trash them, they will take tags depending on how far advanced they are, and they might not be prepared for said tags. If they don't have enough clicks to clear tags on their turn, we can punish them with an exchange. So this is where the deck all comes together very well. False flag feeds into our tagged win condition by enabling exchange of information. Now, of course, for all these to work, we need to have good ice to protect said assets. Otherwise, we can never get false flag up to 7 advancement tokens. In faction, we have pretty good ice. Endless Euler, of course, a very taxing barrier. One of the best in the game, actually. And we have some cheap yet taxing ice in faction, IP Block, and Archangel. So these are ice that are going to defend our centrals. You know, we can place 1 or 2 pieces of ice on centrals and be fairly confident that the runner can't run through them every single turn. Meanwhile, the remote will be protected by Endless Euler, but we do need a little more oomph, a little more kick, which is why we are willing to spend our remaining influence and our restricted slot on Surveyor, a very reliable remote ice that can really help us get those false flags through. Now, because we are playing 3 copies of both False Flag and Surveyor, we unintentionally stumble into an alliance. We now have 6 Wayland cards in our deck, which means that we can play Consulting Visit, the Alliance Wayland card that allows us to search for operations and play them. This is incredibly useful because we are playing lots of one-off operations that support our tag win condition. One of exchange of information, one of C-source, one of hard-hitting news. Consulting Visit gets us there, ensures our consistency. So that's really nice to have. It's, not having to fork out the influence cost of Consulting Visit. So with all that said and done, there's one last point that we really need to shore up before we can actually bring such a deck to JNet. We need to defend our agendas. Having 6 defensive agendas, well, technically 3, is not enough. Sooner or later, you're going to draw into half your agendas, and all the runner has to do is to run HQ repeatedly to win the game. Because of this, having preemptive action and all 3 copies of it is absolutely essential. Preemptive action is a great card for drawing out the game. For those of you who are not very familiar with mechanics, preemptive action allows you to put 3 cards from your bin back into your R&D. Essentially, every time you play preemptive action, your R&D increases in size by 3, giving you extra turns, extra time to get money and to advance your false flags. As I said, advancing false flag is very expensive. It takes nearly 3 whole turns in order to get a false flag from HQ into your score area. So the longer you can drag out the game, the better, because you are naturally on a timer. Your R&D is your timer. The thinner R&D gets, the more exposed your agendas are, and preemptive action helps to combat that somewhat. Yeah, so one of the key parts about piloting this deck is agenda manipulation. You want to have your agendas in the correct place at all times, and finding a window to put your agendas in the bin so that you can preemptive them later is going to be a key part of this deck, because otherwise every agenda you draw is going to be stuck in hand forever, because as mentioned, you can't score them. So to prevent the runner from outright winning by simply running your HQ, you have to at times put agendas in the bin and preemptive them back. So this is why we are running 3 copies of this one powerful card. Right, so this is how our deck list looks like. Most of the cards we've already gone through. The problem is this deck is really light on money. We spend so many slots on the tagging, on the tag punishment, the ice, and all the support cards, and especially the fake agenda. So we really have very few slots for money. It's really our ID ability that's carrying us, and we hope that our opponent runner will steal a couple of SSL endorsements to kickstart our economy engine. Whether this will work or not, there's only one way in which we can find out. Let's head into the game. Fingers crossed. Today we are up against Kenma, and we know that's a pretty aggressive criminal ID. So we are not too thrilled when we see our subpar opening hand, which was already a mulligan, by the way. We drew 1/3 of our agendas in the first 6 cards. This is definitely not what you want to happen in a deck where you're trying not to score agendas at all. Right, at least we have a few pieces of ice, so we can at least defend these agendas fairly well in our opening turns. But don't be surprised if a legwork just shows up and just wipes my HQ clean of agendas. You'll notice that I reserved the Surveyor. I didn't use it as HQ or R&D ice. We always want Surveyor to be remote ice, because that's how we can tax our opponent out. Now we are going to put Echo Chamber in the remote to potentially bait out an inside job or a spearfishing from our opponent. Given that they are Ken Tenma, it's quite likely that they are running one of these 2 bypass events, run events. So being able to force that out is pretty nice. Even though we do need the Echo Chambers eventually in our score area, we're happy to concede some in the early game if it means that, if it means that we can slowly drain our opponent of their run events, and more importantly, because we can put these Echo Chambers back in our deck with preemptive action. Now, unfortunately, a single Surveyor on the remote isn't the best piece of ice at all. Our opponent easily avoids it by out-tracing both times and trashing the Echo Chamber. Maybe I should have waited one more turn before attempting that remote, but you'll notice immediately that this deck is just too poor most of the time to keep up with most runners. If I wanted an Endless Euler into a Surveyor remote, that's 12 credits I need in order to res and install those ice, and you just don't have that sort of money, especially when my opponent is trying to be conservative with giving me Azmari triggers. So it's a bit unfortunate in that sense, because this single Surveyor on the remote is not going to do much to deter my opponent. As you saw there, they could easily just drop the inside job, run my remote. Thankfully, it was an NGO front that allowed me to gain tempo over my opponent. But I only have so many NGO fronts to sack. Eventually, it'll have to be proper agendas that I put in there, or proper false flags. So we need to draw into the false flag, which we already do, and some ice to protect it. Now, usually you put the Endless Euler on the remote as well. But at this point, I'm very, very paranoid about getting agenda flooded. It won't be long before I draw my 3rd agenda, and as I speak, there it is. So yeah, we really cannot afford to lose the legwork. My opponent's almost certainly running it, and we need to be able to stop them from getting into HQ. Right? As our opponent tries to go for the long game by installing pad tap, I'm going to deny that, destroy the pad tap, and start to think about when's a good time to put my false flag into the remote and begin advancing it. Right now, the remote's not exactly taxing. 6 credits to get past Endless Euler, and only a handful more for Surveyor. So I wanted at least 3 ice on the remote before I even thought about beginning to advance the false flag. Now, false flag is really, really expensive to score. For a 3-point agenda, A regular 3-point agenda would set you back 6 clicks, including the click to install, and 5 credits, which is the 5 credits needed to advance it. False flag, on the other hand, requires 9 clicks, 1 click to install, 7 clicks to advance, and 1 click to trigger it to add it to your score area. And it also requires 9 credits, 2 to res and 7 for the advancement tokens. So it's almost twice as much as a regular agenda in terms of cost, which is fairly ridiculous. My opponent attempts to cut off my major source of revenue in Asmari by playing Employee Strike, but thankfully we find our one-off scarcity, so that overrides the current, and we are able to get rid of the pad tabs as well. Now let's see if I can bait my opponent into running a remote. If you notice, at this point I still cannot afford to res, or rather to defend my remote properly. I could res all the ice on the remote, but then I wouldn't have any money left to advance anything in there, which is why I put the echo chamber in there first. Echo chamber is a lot less expensive to score than false flag, and it also turns on exchange of information if I do draw it at a later time. Let's see if my opponent contests this remote. I'm kind of hoping they do, but if they don't, well, it gets pretty awkward as they play a Fisk investment seminar here. So normally I would actually put the echo chamber in my scoring area the next turn, but clearly I can't do that here. I'm flooded with cards, I need to get rid of them somehow. I'm already starting to plan my next turn, because my next turn is definitely going to involve playing a bunch of cards from my hand and discarding some. Most likely I'll need to put an ice on archives and then ditch some agendas in there and wait for a preemptive action to show up. So that's my plan. Thankfully we are up against Ken Tenma. Ken Tenma decks typically do not run Sneak Door Beta, unlike some other criminals, because it's not a run event, it doesn't synergize with your ID ability. It also consumes quite a lot of memory. So instead, Ken Tenma typically uses Dirty Laundry to abuse and open archives instead of using Sneak Door. So I don't have to worry about my opponent sneaking into my HQ just yet, but I do need to worry about my discards here. I can't jam the NGO front in the remote because there's an echo chamber in there, and I really don't want to throw away any of the cards in my hand. All of them are really, really good. I need the false flags, I need the agendas, and exchange of information is a nice out to have in case my opponent takes tags. So for one turn, I needed to tide over and hope that they don't steal the SSL in archives. It's a very obvious steal here, it's a very obvious run, but I'm not icing archives because I believe it was a surveyor that was in my hand, and I'd much rather a remote surveyor than an archive surveyor. Also, they have already used 2 if not all 3 of their Dirty Laundries, so the chances of them running archives this turn are fairly low. You'll also notice I ditched an NGO front into the bin. You almost never ditch economy in this deck because money is so scarce, but when you have an echo chamber in the remote, you don't really have a choice. Now my opponent leaves no trace on HQ, which is a huge threat. They have a 2 in 5 chance, 40% chance of hitting the degree mill in my hand, and another 40% chance of hitting an important false flag from my hand. I definitely did not want them to get into HQ, but was I willing to pay 6 credits to stop them from doing so? That's an endless EULA that's gonna get D-res here. You gotta pay the iron price, there are too many agendas in hand. So my opponent does end the run, but at what cost? They paid 2 credits and I had to pay 6 to res the endless EULA, and they don't even get face check punished. Right, so at that point I could have played hard hitting news. I chose not to because I was way too poor, only on 10 credits, no way. So I'm just going to let that go and instead score my echo chamber. The most important part about scoring the echo chamber here is actually freeing up the remote so that I can actually jam a false flag in on my next turn. I'm really running out of hand space here. The max hand size of 5 is really causing problems, so I would definitely like to start scoring the false flag here. My opponent finally discovers the SSL endorsement I ditched because they did a Deuce's Wild Run. So, well, that's not too bad for me. At least I'm going to get 9 credits over the course of the next few turns, and that's going to be absolutely crucial for scoring the false flag. Now I'm going to start by leaving the false flag unadvanced. Right? This doesn't look like an agenda. I don't think they're going to contest it, and if they do, I'm going to have enough money to res all the ice on my remote. If they don't contest it, I'm going to start advancing my remote false flag here. Also, back to the SSL endorsement, something really funny happened. My opponent initially, at the start of their turn, decided to rebirth into Ian Sterling. This is the identity that gives the runner 2 credits per turn if they have fewer agenda points than the corp, which they did. They were on 0 points to my 1 point. But then they ran archives and stole my SSL, so Ian Sterling is basically turned off for the rest of the game here, especially after they steal this second SSL off the top of R&D. So in essence, they basically did a completely worthless rebirth, which was so funny. Well, it's not completely worthless. They got 1 link out of it, which is actually pretty significant against NBN. Yeah, and the other thing is, now that my opponent's on match point, I'm really concerned about losing to a deep HQ dig. Any HQ run at this point is going to cost me the game as they proceed to divert my funds here. Of course, I'm going to be forced to res all my endless Eulers here. Make them pay 12 credits to get the 9 credit swing from diversion of funds. Gotta do that. And yep. Funds diverted, and now I'm so poor, so they can de-res my endless Euler with ease. I'm surprised they did not contest the remote. This would have been a perfect time to actually contest the remote given I was so poor, but my opponent chose not to. Instead, I got my SSL money, and now it's time to show up my archives. There's no way I'm going to leave all these degree mills in hand. They are going into the bin. And I have a preemptive action to recycle back in R&D. I just need to tide over this one turn where there are going to be 3 degree mills in the bin. This is very scary. If they run archives right now, they're just going to outright win. It's only a turnpike on archives. It's not going to stop them, so they win if they run archives here. Thankfully, they don't. They were too poor. They decided not to. So I get to see another day by using preemptive on all the degree mills in my archives. Now, of course, I could have chosen to leave them in archives instead. But, you know, if all it takes is 1 archives run for them to win the game on degree mills, I'd rather not. So I just put them all in R&D, hoping to show up R&D later with an Archangel from my hand. Meanwhile, I'm going to slowly but surely crawl my way to 7 advancement tokens. Here I am actually half hoping that they would actually run the false flag so that I can land a bunch of tags on them that might change the game. It might not. They have no one home. Yes, that's right. They have no one home installed there. So that card actually kind of turns off false flag, because as I'm about to dish on the 3 tags by false flag that has 7 advancement tokens on it, the no one home can simply avoid all those tags. That is nasty. Yeah. Thankfully, they don't seem interested in contesting my surveyor remote at all. Instead, they're just going to hit R&D repeatedly for single accesses. At this point, R&D has 2 agendas and 14 cards, so not a very good chance that they will be able to win off it. But my opponent repeatedly Fisk Investment seminaring me definitely puts a timer on my head. Every time they play the Fisk Investment Seminar, it undoes a preemptive action, right? Every time I want to preemptive action to put 3 cards back in R&D to lengthen the game, they force me to draw 3 cards off R&D to hasten the game, to get all the agendas into my hand and archives where they are much less safe. So as you see here, they're going to swoop my hand with a legwork, and this is how you lose. You have agendas in hand and you can't stop their legwork. Well, 60% chance they hit the degree mill on the first try. That game was such a slog. I had to speed it up 1.8 times just so that I can cover it without falling asleep. I mean, you can't blame me. Most of the game was spent either flipping echo chambers or just slow advancing false flag. It's such a bad card. It took me 5 turns between installing it and adding it to my score area. It's so slow and only worth 3 agenda points. I was but halfway towards my victory condition. I still needed to score another false flag in order to win. That was a long way away. In a regular deck, if you're not doing this no score challenge, don't even bother playing false flag. If you can score it, you should be playing bloody government takeover instead. I mean, as a competitive player, I shouldn't be advocating the use of government takeover, but let's face it, it's way better than false flag. You can even threaten punitive counter-strike with it. With false flag, it's not really rewarding if you add it to your score area, and even if they run it and take the tags, it's I mean, my opponent had no one home, so that portion of false flag was basically completely neutralized. Right, so I spent a lot of the game talking about how I was on a timer, a ticking bomb on my head. And to explain that a bit more, at the end of the game when I lost, I had 13 cards left in my deck. If you do the maths, that means I drew roughly 70% of the cards in my deck. Assuming that the agendas are uniformly distributed, that means that 4 of my 6 agendas would have been drawn, meaning that they will either be in HQ or archives. Obviously, installing these agendas is not an option. If I install them out in the open, the runner will steal them, easy points. If I put them in my remote, that means that is my remote slot taken. I can't use my remote to score false flags or to score echo chambers. So, yeah. I mean, you might be considering full immersion Rec Studio here, possibly, but deck slots are really tight. So, based on this theory, as long as you have more than enough agenda points to win in both HQ and archives, the runner can easily sweep your HQ and archives for the game. All they need to do is to be able to run archives once and to sweep your hand using a card like Legwork, which my opponent did. And yeah, that's all they need to do to get 3 of your 6 agendas, which is exactly what my opponent did. This is why this deck is so difficult. You need to be able to win on agenda points before you draw too many of your agendas, because as long as your opponent is well equipped enough, it's actually very difficult to keep your degree mills and your SSL endorsements safe. Well, it was a very difficult challenge and I did not manage to complete it, but Tris did. I don't have footage of it unfortunately, but he did manage to successfully win a game without scoring points, scoring a single agenda and without flatlining the opponent. So, well done Tris, and thank you very much for making this video possible. It was a very good suggestion from Tris, and hopefully that will inspire you viewers to perhaps attempt the same thing. Trust me, it's going to be really difficult, even more so than you think. But I think the underlying lesson here is that even though we are moving in yet another step closer to Android Netrunner's license expiring on the FFG side, no one's going to stop you from enjoying Netrunner in the way you love it. There's so many ways to play Netrunner. You can play cube draft, you can do snake draft, and you can do all these silly formats like limit 6, gotta go fast versus 5 hours like I showcased. You can do a no basic actions deck, and well, here's yet another way in which you can twist the game and spice it up for your own enjoyment. The sky's your limit, really, and I hope that even though the game loses official support, there'll be more such fun stuff coming out from all you people out there. Till next time, happy net running. See ya.